Good morning, everyone. This is Brian Setzer, and we're in our second Facebook live cast entitled Barriers for Breakfast. This is really an exciting day for me as I talk with innovation leaders across my career and in my network and people that I've developed relationships with and certainly admire. And our guest today, Kristen Swela from New Tech Network, is no exception. There's lots we're going to get into today around ensuring sort of equity in this digital world. And we're going to talk about where that conversation has been, where it is now, and kind of where we think it's headed. So, Kristen, before I get into the meat of the questions today, I did this last week with our friend and colleague, Richard Boyd, as to how we met and how we kind of came to connect with each other. And what's interesting about Kristen is that she was actually at the first lunch where I met my wife, and we had a conversation around technology, and she was smart enough to leave the lunch early as she saw the chemistry igniting and paid the bill, and the rest is history. So not only do I owe her a lot in the industry in terms of technology wisdom and equity wisdom and the work they're doing at New Tech, but we've been friends for a long time, and I'm thrilled to have you as a guest today. So I want to get right into it and just give you an opportunity to tell about why you're in this work and kind of why you agreed to join this topic today.
Thanks, Brian. We do have a lot of history, and that continues to both build beautiful families, but also incredible, schools and K-12 public education. And so it's really fun to be here. I have been at this game for nearly 30 years now. And what I continue to love about our work, and that keeps me up at night and gets me up in the morning, is this opportunity to find that promise in each of our students, to know them by their strengths and their name and their needs, and to really help accelerate whatever trajectory they're on, and to really make the promise of education this opportunity for students to thrive in an increasingly complex world, and to be able to have great work that they're passionate about and can contribute to their communities in a meaningful way. So thanks for having me.
You bet. Glad to invite you in and also reconnect. The pandemic has been tough on us as far as getting together face to face. And one of the reasons we did this Facebook live cast is we wanted to simulate sort of connecting at a conference or having a conversation over a drink or a meal. And I think anytime you build a bigger table, or anytime you're privileged enough to invite more voices into the discussion, you should. And one of the things that I've always liked about our commonalities in our career is we both served as principals, and we had this opportunity at the school level every day to invest in relationships. And I would say during the time we were coming up, both of us had this common ethos around no significant learning could occur without a significant relationship, to borrow from James Comer. But I don't know that we'd gotten into equity in the way we think about it today. I think we were always disposed towards being frustrated collectively that our students or our staff did not have the opportunities we wanted for all. But the way we've kind of evolved in that discussion, from leading at the building level to now nationally, I know New Tech in particular has made equity a focus and is doing work to ensure that all of the schools in its network are really putting that as a priority. So I'd love to hear, and I know our audience would, about the work that's going on at New Tech now and kind of what you folks are up to.
Yeah, Brian, I think that we have always constructed our model as an instrument of equity. And when I talk about our model, I'm really talking about the heart of that model being a different set of outcomes that matter. And they're outcomes that, from our origin story back in the mid-90s, the business community said to us in Napa, California, where our first school was, and we've now grown to this thriving network of several hundred schools across the country. But they said, you're producing graduates that, graduate high school, can go to college, can actually graduate college, and then they come to work for us. And there's a gap between the scores that they've achieved and all that comes with that, and the skills that we need them to have. We need them to be empowered agents of their own learning and work, and they just aren't coming to us with those skill sets. And so the system was designed really to produce students who could pass tests and master content and demonstrate that reliably over time. And what they really asked us to do is to co-construct a very different, at that point, high school experience only, now we're K-12, that helps students develop collaboration and communication skills and to really foster a more comprehensive academic preparation. And that required a really different type of schooling. And we selected project-based learning, which, you know, I think of as an asset-based equity pedagogy, right? So if we just talk about the instructional heart of our work as an equity pedagogy, it's sort of always been central. And we selected that because students could engage in authentic, meaningful work that was connected to all the standards they had to learn, but really gave them a why for learning it and a how for how they might use that knowledge and apply it to their community to contribute to the problems that they were trying to solve. And it just really required a learner-centered focus. And when you and I came up in school, and probably when we both started teaching, it was all about the teacher, right? It was all about what we knew and could share. And I'll confess that, like, I didn't know that we had students with learning disabilities. I didn't know that we had students who were English language learners because I never saw them in my academic preparation.
Right.
They were invisible in the system and set aside. And what we wanted to do in the network is detrack. We wanted to bring together all the students so that we could learn together and move forward together. And so PBL really provided that conduit for us to have a purpose, to have students collaborate, communicate, solve problems, and develop the agency that we know they need to be successful.
Now, a lot there that we are also vibing on at Setzer Group from a standpoint of what we're seeing now in, well, we really saw it before COVID, is that people were so concerned with the floor, what those standardized test scores looked like or how they were going to be evaluated, that they weren't really going with a both and mentality towards college work and readiness assessments, how they were going to move into career and life. And I love this focus at New Tech on sort of equity-based pedagogy wrapped around problem solving, problem-based inquiry. And frankly, that's what we're doing at Setzer Group for the workforce. We're trying to help people on the workforce side understand that the way you solve problems collectively as a team or as a part of an overall problem set is going to make you more effective. You know, some of the things that we're seeing in our work with the University of South Florida's course in diversity in the workplace, for instance, is that if you give a problem to 3 white guys, you're going to get an outcome. But if you give that same problem to a diverse set of people, 7 to 8 out of 10 times, that solution is going to be better because of the lived experiences of who's solving it or who's involved. And so I think one of the things New Tech really does well is present that opportunity for every student to be a part of solving those problems, a part of a team, to look across how they're going to work in teams. So they come out, I think, with stronger skills, knowledge, and dispositions to go to college, to go to career, because they've been through that process at New Tech. So I want to, use that context as people are joining us on our Barriers for Breakfast podcast. We're here with Kristen Swila and talking about New Tech Network and her work across the country and working with New Tech schools. So we were already having challenges, Kristen. This was already hard to get out of a test first mentality to more of a holistic education. And here comes COVID. Give me a sense of what you went through, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I'll share some of our lessons too. Once the whole world at scale had to instantly access what you do differently, what have you been learning?
Yeah, so it was just such a defining moment to, get a call saying the world is shutting down on March 5th. I was in Houston. I was delivering a presentation about our work to a bunch of conference attendees and basically was told it's all done. We got to go home and
Right.
be safe. And so, schools had that same challenge, right? And so I'm talking with our school leaders, and I'm going to talk about Texas because Baylor really showed out last night in the national championship game. So I think I'm just going to focus my stories on Texas. But, schools live in neighborhoods that have inequitable access to the infrastructure that supports learning at home, right? And we have always worked with schools who had differential sort of assets in their community, and yet in our origin story 20 years ago, our schools were one-to-one and continued to be one-to-one. And learning didn't stop when you left the building. And so how might we solve for those sorts of things? This took that sort of solution orientation and planning that we do with all of our schools who, if they have one stoplight or they live in a thriving metropolis, we help them design systems that enable learners to learn in the building and out of the building, right? That was fundamental to our work and has been, but COVID took that to a whole different level because previously our students were able to come back and forth to the building. They could download things in the building and take it home to work, for example. That was completely interrupted. And so, schools that were in neighborhoods with, sort of widespread internet access responded better, right? Across the country. School leaders who had required staff to work with students to design solutions for them to learn whether they were in the building or out of the building, and they had designed the system oriented around that, did better. And so what we were seeing in the communities that we served that had both new tech and non-new tech schools, and that's all of them, by the way, we were already using online tools. Our students were already oriented around our Echo platform, which is a learning management system. It's designed for students and adults to collaborate and learn together and get feedback and to have those learning exchanges. And they'd already established kind of norms and operating behaviors around that and systems for it. And that enabled, neighborhoods without widespread internet access, and many of our communities serve students farthest from opportunity, right? It still allowed them to thrive. And they had to deploy smartly things like, in Dallas, there's a whole push around hotspots so that students can access it, or mobile buses going out to neighborhoods to make sure that students had access. That notion that the internet should be like oxygen is kind of fundamental to us. It's a fundamental thing that we need, that all students deserve, like electricity and running water, right? And we had to solve for that. And the COVID crisis really illuminated how much harder we had to work as educators to interrupt the opportunity gaps that we're seeing in education for both our schools and our communities, so that kids could just start to learn in this new world.
On the access front, it's interesting to me that we were seeing evidence back in 2007 with snow days that we could put Wi-Fi on school bus, that we could have a school serve as the Wi-Fi hotspot with people driving up to it, that we could have a little known fact in Katrina was that a lot of the Wi-Fi hubs were laundromats where people were going to, wash clothes during and after the destruction, and also accessing their schoolwork. So we had a lot of these lessons out there, but people were slow to change or slow to embrace how that would work. And so a lot of times when I have guests on like you on our Barriers for Breakfast podcast, and we talk about the innovations out there, people go, listen, we can't do it here, or that's something that happens somewhere else, or you don't understand our situation. And as a fellow person who is in a lot of school districts, a lot of states, how do you get past some of these from here and come here arguments? How do you help leaders understand that just because where they're starting, they can actually enact the leadership and change necessary to move to some of these equitable solutions? How do you work with them on that?
Yeah, I think it's just starting with an acknowledgement that it's really hard, right? None of us have all the answers. If we did, we would have already solved this problem. And so how do we together ask the right questions and focus on improvements that none of us expect for any of them to flip a switch and for it all of a sudden to be better? This work is a journey. And by the way, there's like no sense of a finish line, right? We're never going to arrive at an ideal solution. We're always going to be incrementally advancing toward that. And so We really sit down with communities, and I do this very often at the front end of our planning work, and then we continue that in implementation. But we sit down with our communities and ask them, what are the drivers for you seeking a different type of learning outcome for your students? You're clearly not happy with the outcomes you're getting for all students.
Right.
And so that does require that we do some things differently. So let's put on the table all of the things in the system. Let's really see the system and put on the table all those things that get in the way, that are barriers for the outcomes that you want. And then let's intentionally design some solutions and be disciplined about enacting them so that we can see if it actually works. And sometimes it's just they don't know where to start.
Right.
It's this impossible, enormous challenge in front of them. And when we really break it down into some component parts and can begin to execute a plan around whether it's wireless access points through buses or the McDonald's Wi-Fi or driving up to the school on a Saturday with some buddies so that you can get on the Wi-Fi, like all those things come into higher resolution, and it helps just make them feel like it's possible. You got to just take baby steps toward the next right move. But certainly doing the same thing we've always done or doing nothing is going to be insufficient, and it's not going to get the outcomes they want. And so, are we committed to the change or not? And if we are, let's try some things differently.
Yeah, I love that. And I was reminded, as our relationship has unfurled over the years, we have this sort of shared interest in learning. And one of the things that we've done quite often together is study visits, or, I've asked you, can I bring a team to see the new tech culture in this area of the country? Can we understand a little bit about how this works in a day in the life or a week in the life? And one of the tactics that I try to get superintendents and chancellors and leaders to see is that you have to have a learning agenda. Your comment about we don't know all the answers, or we don't know all the answers from our neighbors. I think one of the challenges we have is, a couple people get together over steak dinner and they say, what are you doing? And what are you doing? And I'll do that, instead of really going deeper on what are the risk, what are the opportunities, who's doing work that's exceptional. So, if folks out there have not heard of new tech and they visited a new tech school and went on a study visit, what kinds of things would they see, and how would that improve sort of their perspective of what's possible in your network versus what they may or may not be experimenting with outside of it?
Yeah. So the thing I missed the most about COVID is being able to be in buildings with adults and students who are learning together. And as high school principals, we know that we can put our finger on the pulse of the culture within 30 seconds or so of a campus. Like, it's palpable. The culture just pervades everything on a campus. And so our culture is oriented around things, obviously, like safe, inclusive, and emotionally supportive learning environments, because we're asking everybody in the building to take learning risks. We're asking everybody in the building to stretch and to be vulnerable about what they know and what they don't. But it's also oriented around this empowerment, right? So fundamentally, we want to empower our learners to be agents of their own learning, and to, develop a growth mindset that allows them to see, these are the things I feel confident that I know, and these are the things that I still want to learn, or that are totally not yet, right? I'm not there yet, but I'm going to keep working toward it.
Right.
And that learning orientation and that empowered culture, when you see adults, right, working together on their own learning and exercising agency, and giving that to students, and that culture just, is like the thing that makes all of the students feel like they really are partners in their learning, and they have some choice and voice in the work, that just matters so much. And so if I'm bringing school board members or superintendents or, faculty to a campus to do a learning visit, when they walk in the building, they're going to see students interacting with students. They're going to see students interacting with business people, not just students sitting in rows listening to a teacher, right? The learning happens everywhere. They might see a student on the phone in the hallway with, a business that they're partnering on a particular problem, right? And so they're not going to see the conventional sort of sit and get things. They're going to see groups of students and groups of adults working together to get better together. and it's all about improvement. And so, along the way, they're learning a lot of the standards and skills. And in Texas, that's the TEKS. And, they have to learn all those things so that they can pass the assessments and move on to the grades. But they're also doing it for this much larger purpose, which is really about building better people that can contribute to our communities and to our schools and to the world in better ways. And so it feels very different. It looks very different. And it is unsettling for folks who really like order and convention and what looks like learning on the surface, but really wasn't ever, right? This is more complex and messy and real. And I don't know about your learning style, but I know that I've always learned more from failure than from my successes. And so if I'm failing forward, I know I'm moving in the right direction. And eventually I'm going to get to a place where I feel like I'm more confident and competent in that particular set of content and skills.
I love that. And what's an interesting segue is while we've been talking, I've gotten an automatic notification that my son's science Zoom is about to begin, right? And so we've transitioned into this world, and we have prompts as parents on how we're supposed to engage. We expect on our cell phone throughout our daily lives to understand where a restaurant is or how to navigate to where a location is. But for some reason, the way many of us experience school is a lot of what you hear right now. You hear people saying, I can't wait to get back to normal. And I just cringe at that. I didn't like normal before in our business, and I don't want to see us revert back to things that are not going to help move a student in their agency. I'm worried, Kristen, that we've missed an opportunity in many places in the country with the pandemic to fundamentally rethink what we could do. So as we devised this barriers for breakfast, Facebook Live, and thought about innovation, we have an interesting inflection point right now. We're nearing the end of a vaccination protocol. There's a lot of stimulus money going towards technology, teacher training, safety, the things that we're seeing in the philanthropic community around equity. And we have some opportunity that's not going to be on the table forever. Maybe in the next year to 18 months, we've really got to help district leaders, school leaders, university leaders, organizational leaders think about a better normal, a next normal. So I'd love to kind of conclude in our last 5 or 7 minutes with what's on your roadmap? What is New Tech thinking about? And happy to share the same from our perspective and what we see the next 3 to 5 years turning out to be.
Yeah, so, I think that the pandemic has really given me a once in a career opportunity to meet the moment and to fundamentally rethink, like unlearn everything I thought I knew about what the institution of ed should be, and just think about what if we could create schools and systems oriented around equity-centered practices that truly fostered equitable opportunities. Because the system before wasn't designed for everyone to be successful. It really wasn't. There was this winners and losers sort of mindset. And what if we really called into question and interrogated all the rules that have been operating in the education systems that have remained largely unchanged for several hundred years, right? And started asking ourselves things like, well, should we keep doing that? Are we going to get the outcomes that we want for our students if we do this instead? Are we satisfied with the outcomes the system is designed to get? Like, what if before COVID and normal was really not good for any of us? Right? And what if we just acknowledged that and said, how about designing out intentionally all of those aspects of the system that aren't supporting learning, for our students, that aren't supporting learning for our adults? And for me, and I think you called this earlier, a leader's focus on adult learning could not be more important in this moment or in any moment. The onus is on us as school and district leaders, and we've been both, right? To ensure that our adults are improving, that our adults are learning. Because if they don't have that model, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about our New Tech model and the way that we work with schools, we model what we think good teaching and learning looks like. We give them that sense, right? Not just in seeing it, but in experiencing it so that they can reproduce it. And so what if we learn together how to design out all those things that aren't working in service of learning and in service of learning for all? And if we really focused on what would it take to make sure all students were able to thrive
Mm.
and to contribute, so that, you know, we create at our heart, we want to create a more just and equitable society. And we
Mm.
want to have students who are able to fully participate in our democracy. And schools before COVID weren't oriented to do that. And it wasn't like people weren't working as hard or as smartly as they knew to do. I've
Right.
never met a district that
Mhm.
wasn't working hard or trying to do the right things. But to your point earlier, perspective really matters. And how are we infusing the adult learning experiences with perspective so that they can see what their neighbors are doing and they can take those best parts in their context and make it their own for the students and community that they serve. And I think that's where we're headed,
Mm.
right? Those are the things that we want to make sure we have, that the education of institution really is about helping
Mm.
students thrive in this increasingly complex world, helping them have the skills and knowledge to be able to, you know, create a society that we are proud of, that's just and equitable and democratic. And so I've got a lot more work to do. Almost 30 years in, I think I just charted another 50. We'll see.
That's right. That's right. What I like about the alignment on the mission and vision and where you're going is we've spent this last year at Setzer Group, as you know, as a board member, really focusing on what we're noticing. And I think very early on, we hacked sort of the Stanford and the liberatory design process to look at, were we diverse enough as a firm? Were we serving diverse clients? How were we engaging diverse opportunities with interns? And did we have the training and knowledge and skills and dispositions to get into that work? And I know you've participated at the board level in that and thinking about, you know, equipping our capacity and being a part of our capacity for growth, so that if we want an equitable and just society, one of the first things we have to do is commit to where we are and what we need to learn and how we need to be inclusive. After we do that, we need to practice, iterate, fail forward, invite other people in to look at our designs that previously weren't even asked, and then to be able to put in leadership positions folks who do not look like us so that they can engage and work in ways that we're not even, you know, privy to or aware of in terms of lived or shared experience. So I've heard a few things today. I've heard access to ensure sort of this, you know, equity in a digital world. I've heard design and how this sort of problem-based pedagogy makes sense, not only for schools, but workplaces. And now where we're arriving is this intentionality around diversity, equity, and inclusion design, but through digital mediums, right? So one of the things I wanted to ask you kind of as a final way for us to think about it, and I'm happy for you to challenge me on this, but I wanted to have a dialogue, is I see a lot of critical race theory in the space, and it's very positive, and in my view, and people need to be aware of that. Very simple examples like, you know, do we understand that much of the narrative we've read was not written by BIPOC authors? You know, so at a content or a curriculum level,
Mhm.
yeah, that's kind of an easy thing to look and audit your catalog and say, maybe we need to think differently about our resources and how we put things into play. But as you also study things like critical race theory, you get into, well, what are the acts and laws that were prohibitive for so many years that have really fostered the systems that we're encountering today? And some of them are still in place. How do we ensure that zip codes don't determine our schools? I know one of the awesome things around new tech is that, you know, once you have that kind of opportunity in a school district, that often students come from different places and different spaces to be a part of it. And that in itself becomes a platform for where they're headed. So I give some of that context to say that going diverse, equitable, and inclusive in a digital world, I'd kind of like to end there. Like how are we moving both of our shops into Zoom, into LMSs like Echo, into Slack, or into supports or help desk? How can we be thoughtful around equity in those scenarios as we're sort of re-emerging to this next normal? And do you think it's important?
Yeah, I do think it's important. And I think we spend an awful lot of time as a network trying to listen,
Mm,
to lead in this space. And so our last leadership summit was really oriented around that notion of a listening leader and
mm,
how in a digital environment can we find opportunities to listen. And so one of my coworkers was doing some work with the District of Columbia schools that we serve the last week. It was on Thursday, and they had put together some Zoom interviews of students so that faculty could listen to students'
mm,
voices,
mm,
um, students that they had not seen
mm,
this entire school year, right? Had not been able to come to school. Students who may or may not have turned on their camera
mm,
during, instruction if it was live, right? And the power of listening to those student voices and the way it just filled up the teachers' souls for like, yes, this is the work I want to do. This is why I came into education. It's not just because I loved high school
yeah,
English or grammar, which I do, by
right.
the way, but it's because I want to teach people. I want to make, better people. And so doing empathy interviews and designing with, to your point about liberatory design processes, like that's foundational. And we do all that so that we don't just come in with, you know, here's an answer I've seen applied somewhere else, and I'm not going to pressure test it. I'm just going to implement it.
Yep.
It's sort of like ready, fire, aim, right? I'm just going to put some stuff in place. And a lot of people, the crisis really did create that environment, right? We had to put some things up that we were ill-equipped to sort of do as a K-12 public ed.
Mm,
But our schools are really thinking about continuing to drive project-based learning in a digital space. We're finding all sorts of solutions to do that, to continue to let students work with our business partners and their student peers that they're collaborating with on a project, to engage in really complex problem solving, and all of it, being focused on learner-centered, growth-oriented sets of outcomes, not merely performance, but also this growth orientation, which I think is really important. And doing all of that in a digital space requires us to listen differently. Whose voices do we not hear? Whose voices are we hearing too much from, right? How do we create space and time and honor those student experiences in a way that really allows them to see how they can contribute? And every student and every adult in our buildings has something to contribute. And what we learn in a project-based environment is that our students find that out faster about their peers. And it isn't like, I'm an academically gifted student and you're not, so I get to do all the work. It's like, you have a very different perspective on the world, and I have a lot to learn from you. How can we work together, right?
yeah.
Whether that's through time and space like this, or through, face to face when we get to go back to doing that. I think face to face is good. I miss it. I miss that interaction with our kiddos and our adults.
Thanks for sharing that. And I'll close out for our listeners today. When I began my career, Bill Daggett was a big influence. And one of the
Mhm.
activities that he had us do as a staff was we put 1,000 sheets of paper in an auditorium and we gave people stickers, and the stickers were color coded, and there were things like, I have this student in class, I have this student in athletics, or I have this student in a club.
Mhm.
And everybody put their stickers on, and there were probably 100 pieces of paper that were blank. And it was an interesting lesson for me on, nobody had connected with that student or established a relationship. And I think about what we're seeing now in the digital equity space, where we have people asserting that you must have your cameras on. Well, what if I don't want to show you my home? What
Right.
if I'm not mentally ready today to do anything other than listen? Sometimes these adult practices don't take into account how adults behave. Adults expect to be able to turn that camera off or mute their mic or deal with something. Well, students have to have that same privilege and opportunity as they're interacting in this world. And then I think knowing your data, right? Like making sure that if you've got parents who work certain shifts, they don't all have the support network that other parents do, or the flexibility to work from home. These are real things when we talk about the supports we surround kids with to ensure equity in a digital world. And so a lot of times once we get a sense on the data, we can make better decisions and kind of, come up with better strategies to support all learners in this environment. So I really appreciated sort of this walk through access, design, and also some of the strategies that we can impart to our listeners. I just wanted to give you a chance, if anything else was triggered during that last thread or in our conversation today that you didn't mention about some of NewTek's work, to say a final word, and then I'll close us out here on our Barriers for Breakfast podcast.
Yeah, I'll just name, Brian, that for us, the goal is always to help the systems sort of see the field, the systems that invite us in to their community to help them solve problems that, are under the surface of what they would want to have read in the paper, sort of thing. They invite us in and we help them see that. We help them see all the options available to them. And sometimes they do choose to work with us to advance their path. And sometimes they don't. And it doesn't mean that the learning wasn't valuable. It just means that we helped them illuminate their own path forward and give them a process to evaluate all their options. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about our partnership. I want to work with all of them. And I recognize that, it is their path fundamentally, and we want to help them meet their goals.
Well, thanks for being our second guest. I know we will continue to collaborate in many ways. We'll be back with our Barriers for Breakfast podcast and talking with innovation leaders next month with Holly Morris, CEO of Global Voice, and also one of our team members at Setzer Group on some of our projects in the ELL space and working with languages and students across the country. So really happy you joined us today, and we're going to keep an eye on NewTek. For those of you that want to follow on with NewTek's work, make sure to check out their website and some of the work that Kristen's doing. We'll also be sharing this in some of our supercuts after the session today, so you can check us out at our Facebook site. We'll be bringing that site back up for a final 2 minutes so you can find out where today's recording is, and you can also see the subsequent post in the coming days. Thank you, Kristen.
Thanks, Brian. Great to see you.
You too.